the first big men's work that most men have to do at some point in their life is to deal with the father-son wound. I mean, that sort of began deep men's work as Robert Michael Mead and James Hillman taught it, and as I taught it early on in my conferences, that in order to be a man, you have to do men's work that is consisting of healing this father-son wound that most men, including myself, was in denial about, still perpetrating on the people that we love.
John Lee, sir, welcome to Men This Way. Truly, it is a true honor and privilege to have you on. I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, Bryan, it's my privilege, and I'm glad to be with you. I really thank you for having me.
Yeah. You know, when I conceived of this podcast way back in the day, back in 2018, boy, was that almost 5 years ago now. The intention was, I was aware that I really didn't have any wise elders to look up to. You know, I had older people in my life, and I think I had wise elder women. But looking around, I just couldn't really connect with any of the older men that I was in any kind of connection to. And so, you know, getting to work with you these past, 6-9 months or so, man, you have been an answer to a prayer.
Oh, wow.
So
it made my day.
So to be able to also invite you on now and have a conversation with you in this format, in this way, I'm really eager and excited, and I'm excited to share you with my audience, because I know the same condition exists for my audience. Too few true wise elders, whatever the hell that means, right?
Yeah. Too few mentors, elders that can share all the mistakes we've made over the years.
Yeah. So, and I'll, in the introduction, I will have sang your praises and said some things about you. But what I'd like to do to get us started is to help my audience get to know the man behind, your story a bit. Please tell us about a significant event or experience from your early life that played a fundamental role in shaping you as a man.
Well, I would have to say that my grandfather, my father's father, who made all kinds of mistakes with my father when he was a boy. But by the time I got to my grandfather as a boy, that old man had changed quite a bit. And Granddaddy Lee, as I would have called him, was gentle. He was religious, and again, in the best sense. He went to church, but not beating you over the head with it or proselytizing. And he was very, very kind to me. And it took me many years before I understood that part of the reason he was so kind to me was he did such a lousy job with my dad. But my granddaddy would let me be with him, hang out with him, and we would watch Hee Haw and fake wrestling on Saturdays, and the Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs show, and he'd take me to town, and he'd buy me a Dr. Pepper or Coca-Cola, and it was major in my life, so major that when he died at 13, when I was 13, that was my first real experience with grief. It just broke my heart to have him gone. But the truth is, Bryan, that I've had more men in my life than I sometimes think about. He's the first. When I was 16, I sold clothes in a store part-time because I was already making my money by 12. And the manager of the store showed me how to do it. And then when I was 18, I went over to this bigger, better, more exclusive store, and the owner took me under his wing. Now, none of these people were emotionally expressive. But so I didn't get that part from them, but I learned from them. And they would, at 16, the manager would take me on clothing buying sales in New York. And then at 18, 19, the owner of the store did the same thing. And then when I went back to college at 23, the minister at the Wesleyan Foundation, he and I spent time together, hung out. Again, no discussion of emotional or trauma issues or any of that. And then when I went to graduate school at the University of Alabama, Don Noble in the English department, Pat Green in the Religious Studies department, a couple of people, Reed Badger in the American Studies, they took me under their wing. Now, what that meant is we would go out and drink beer together. But there was no real reason why they did that with me and not others. And then when I got to graduate school at the University of Texas, the chairman of the American Studies department that I was getting my PhD in, he took me under his wing, and we've been friends for 40 years since. And that's where the emotionality started happening. Started talking about deeper, darker, dramatic relationship stuff with him. And then in that same context, a woman, Dr. Betty Sue Flowers, took me under her wing and introduced me personally to Robert Bly.
How old were you at that time?
I would have been 32. She set it up for me to meet him at a seminar he was doing. Got me a scholarship because I didn't have any money. And of course, now by the time we get to Bill Stott and my doctorate, and certainly by Robert Bly, now we are talking, mentoring, talking about all the stuff that you know so well. So that's a long version. But when I stop and think about it, I go, I didn't really trust men growing up because I had real shitty uncles and dad was alcoholic, abusive. But these other men, I gravitated towards them. They gravitated towards me. And I'm still friends with all of them except Robert, who died last December.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, as I'm hearing you talk about this, John, I'm reflecting back on my own life and looking for who were the mentors, who were the stewards, the guides. And honestly, man, I come up pretty bereft. I come up pretty bankrupt. Yeah, certainly a few here and there, no doubt. Some, one that stands out to me was my guidance counselor in middle school who, in a 10-minute meeting, maybe it was 5, was signing me up for high school courses, and I didn't know what the hell to do with my life. And he wasn't really checking in to inquire to see what I wanted to do. He just said, you should take Spanish. You should just learn Spanish. I was like, okay. So I took a year of Spanish, and it just came and went, and it did nothing for me. And like that has been emblematic of the guidance in many ways. They overwhelmingly defined the mentoring that I've had for much of my life was just the hapless, hurried guidance counselor who's like, well, who's incapable of really being curious and really listening into what is this being before me needing, wanting to express through itself. None of that. So much, none of that. And
well, that's true of most men on the planet. That's why you said you were going to open with this question, and I started racking my brains. What was the significant thing? And then I developed this little string of sequential men that, again, there was like no reason for it to happen. But I don't want to make too much of it because my granddaddy, at 13, he didn't set me down and say, let me give you the secrets to life.
Right. Yeah.
No, he set me down and said, here's a peppermint stick. And now I'm going to watch fake.
Yeah, right.
But that impacted me.
Yeah.
juxtaposed against my father, who didn't like me, didn't want really to have anything to do with me. I was more my mother's son than his son,
Mm.
and he beat the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Whereas granddaddy would say, here's a 22 rifle, and I've cleaned out the chicken house. Now let's shoot rats.
Oh man, it sounds delightful, and yeah, the juxtaposition of the relationship with your dad. John, I'll be talking to you more about this in the future, but I just came from a very what's the word? I don't know. Important trip to see my father, and boy, it was actually a bit worse than I suspected.
Oh
yeah, it was actually very painful and very difficult in many ways. Wow. But I'm aware your father, you became a writer and author, wrote a bunch of books, and your father, what was his response to your being an author?
Not much.
Yeah.
I asked my mother one time, I said, Mom, has Dad ever read any of my books? She said, well, son, I would send a book home when it came out, and
Yeah.
she, of course, would read it.
Yeah.
He said, well, your dad would pick it up, and he'd read a page or two, and then he would say the same thing each time. I don't understand what they're saying. So it really was that way,
Yeah. I love that your father had the awareness to say, I don't understand it.
Right.
My dad doesn't have that awareness. My dad thinks he understands it, but then uses it against me in conversation. And yeah, that's kind of what played out there. Is just like, okay, you didn't understand it. Yeah.
Now, when my second book came out, let me talk about the first one and my dad. When the first one came out, my dad did read that one. And in a conversation we had, he said, now, everything you said in that book about me and you was true. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to tell you, I don't ever want you to write anything where it casts your mother in a bad light. Mm-hmm. And he was serious about Flying Boy 2 and 3. I do write about the mother-son wound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he and I didn't talk for 10 years.
Wow.
He was serious about that. I was serious about it too. When the second book came out, he would call me and berate me and put me down and shame me. And I listened to a few of those calls. Finally, I hung up on him and said, until you can talk to me man to man in an appropriate way, then we won't be speaking. And that estrangement lasted 10 years. While I'm doing men's conferences and men's groups with an estranged father.
Yeah,
wow. Or not in my life.
Well, boy, I mean, here I am I'm 48, and again, I'm leading men in men's work, men's groups, through my writing, through actual, coaching, and through the groups that I lead, and we talk a lot about our father stuff, and yeah, boy, one of the things that I always let them know, I'm in it with you guys. I have as good a relationship as I can right now hope to have with my father, and it kind of sucks. It's a horrible relationship in terms of what I would want it to be. So I'm curious. So coming back into the evolution of your journey as a young man and coming into this work, why? Well, two questions here. Why men's work? Like what called to you about specifically stepping into men's work? And maybe you might even want to start with, what is men's work? How do you define this thing we call men's work?
Well, I'll start with how I got into it.
Okay.
And I'll try to define it so I don't not start again.
Yeah.
But a buddy of mine that came from my same part of the country, and we grew up together. In 1979, he handed me an interview with Robert Bly. And that interview, the focus of that interview, or at least what stuck out to me, still does, was Robert said the doorway into deep masculine behavior and consciousness. The doorway was grief.
Wow.
I remember reading that, 79. And again, now I'm totally in my head. I wouldn't have known, bit me on the ass. But I registered that literally as, now that's a good idea. That's a good idea. And then I left it. So then I moved to Austin, Texas to go to graduate school. And I meet this wonderful, incredible woman. And now by this time, I'm reading Robert's poetry. I'm listening to some of his lectures, but still not connecting on an emotional level at all, just purely academic intellectual.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, my dissertation was going to be on Robert Bly and this so-called thing called the men's movement. But the woman left me after 3 years. And the two things she said to me when she finally left is, John, you're the angriest man I've ever known, and you're the saddest man I've ever known.
Wow.
Keep both of those things in you, and you don't want me to express those things.
Oof.
Now, I approached even that statement intellectually. I said, I've never hit you, slapped you, pushed you, or shoved you. Where I came from in Appalachia, that's a good man if he doesn't do those things. But what she meant was this form of rage that I had, of criticism, judgmentalism, and shaming her and all that. So then it was like a light bulb went off, and I thought, I've got to deal with this. I know she's right, but I don't know what she means.
Yeah.
I got to go find out what she means. But it took me so down into the ashes. Then I felt the truth of what Robert said about taking one into deep masculinity. I also realized that she was right, that I was holding on to decades of unexpressed anger as well. And that's where I made a conscious decision. I'm going to learn about and experience grief, but I'm also going to learn about and deal with this pent-up anger that I have. And that was my entrance into the men's work. And I started my first men's group in 1985. And in 1986, I opened the Austin Men's Center, where men would come and do work. But back then, it was all about catharsis and emotional release and body work, as opposed to all the stuff that, I've been reading Jung and Freud since I was 23, so I was pursuing stuff like that intellectually. But then, then I started working on my dissertation, couldn't write it. And Betty Sue Flowers knew my interest in Robert. And she said, let's go to this conference and you're going to meet him. And that sent me on the trajectory that still informs me and my work.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I mean, so much in what you've just shared. I'm what's today? Thursday. I got back from my dad's place on Monday. I spent 4.5 days with him, and I've barely seen him in the last 10, 15 years, but for a couple hours at a time here and there. And, one of the things that we got into a really intense argument, probably a few of them, but one in particular. And by intense argument, I mean, I'm intense and he's doing his best to not express any anger, be very stoic. And I remember at one point, because I'm allowing my anger, I think I have a healthier relationship with my anger than I ever have. And anyway, so I'm expressing my anger as skillfully as I can, surely being unskillful. But at one point, he essentially was telling me, see, you're angry. You're letting your anger get you. You shouldn't be like something. You shouldn't be angry. And I'm just so struck by I also used to believe that I should never get angry.
Right. Me too. Me too.
And I was so fucking angry.
Yeah, me too. I remember one time before I started the men's work,
Yeah.
but I was here in Austin, and that buddy who said that gave me the article, he was living here in Austin, so I came to join him. Short story is, I was helping him move, and I was exhausted that day.
Mm.
He asked me to help him move. I wanted to say no, but I said yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he back then, and he still is sort of, he was very impatient. He does everything like this. And we were moving, and he, come on, John, let's go. Come on, come on. But why I tell the story is finally I just couldn't take anymore.
Mm.
Started sobbing. Tears started running. And Daryl said, John, what's wrong with you? And I said, right now, I'm so angry at you. Never forget his response. He said, you don't look angry.
Wow. Yeah.
And then so when Laurel came and said, you're the angriest man, you know, I just didn't want to be an angry guy because my dad and my uncles were all angry and raging. And so I didn't want to be that. I taught religious studies at the college. I want to be a spiritual guy, not an angry guy.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm curious at that time. I mean, you've been now in, well, actually men's work. What are we talking about? Let's enter that for a moment. What are we talking about? Men's, when we say men's work.
Boy, let me see if I can just enumerate a few things. The first big men's work that most men have to do at some point in their life is to deal with the father-son wound. I mean, that sort of began deep men's work as Robert Michael Mead and James Hillman taught it, and as I taught it early on in my conferences, that in order to be a man, you have to do men's work that is consisting of healing this father-son wound that most men, including myself, was in denial about.
Yeah.
Still perpetrating on the people that we love.
And this is, let's stay here for a moment because I want to highlight what are some of the ways that you see men are in denial of this father-son wound? Like, what are some of the things that may emerge from their mouths?
It's the same thing that emerged from my mouth. I was asked. I told his therapist at 32, and Laurel had left. And I was telling them about my dad having beaten me at early ages. And he said, so are you angry about that? And I said, well, not really. I mean, he deserved it. I was pretty much a handful.
Right.
And Dad, was doing the best good. He was putting food on the table, over our heads, clothes on our back. In other words, I don't want to answer your question. I don't want to feel beatings. I don't want to be angry.
Yeah.
And I saw him 9 sessions before I ever punched a pillow, yelling at how angry I was at my father. The thing that, like this new client I had 2 days ago, he goes, well, I had a pretty healthy childhood, I think. And it was pretty good. And I said, well, tell me about your relationship to your father. And he said, well, he and my mother divorced when I was 10 years old, and I didn't really see him much after that. And I go, Bud, that's what we call a father-son wound. He's absent from your life.
Yeah.
He's not involved with you. And the guy went, oh, my God.
Yeah.
Maybe you're right. And this very smart, intelligent guy who had never thought he was wounded by his father. The second part of the men's thing that I had to come to, but it came a couple of years or 2 later after The Flying Boy came out and after I was running men's group, was the mother-son wound that I nor anybody or any man wanted to talk about. But I realized that wound was impacting my relationship with women and lovers at a level that is terrifying back then. But in the South, as indeed many cultures, and maybe over the United States, but especially in the South, you did not bring up anything derogatory or negative about your mother.
Hence your father not speaking to you for 10 years, for even
Absolutely.
suggesting that there may
Or
have been
beating
something
me.
there.
I could talk about that.
Mm.
And it was like, I'll never forget this. This is so mother son stuff. So I had like 3 books come out, and the first 2 had a lot about the father son wound. And my mother one day said, "So, what are you going to do to me to your father?" And I got so mad at her because I thought even my mother knows I got a mother wound that needs to be treated. So I did. I said, "Yeah, you're right. I've got to do." My mother was a smothering, sort of vampire-ish. I was her surrogate husband, counselor, confidant. Oh, talk about the woundedness. So the father-son wound, the mother-son wound, that was sort of the foundational work of men's work for a long time, and still kind of is. And then there's offshoots of that. Men's work around money issues, men's work around parenting issues. But the father-son and the mother-son is where most of us started.
Yeah. It's fascinating right now. So I run a year-long men's coaching program called Elevate 2023. We're in the midst of right now. It's a small group, 8 to 10 men. We go through it a whole year together. Elevate 2024 will be coming up, and we'll be starting that in a few months, or launching it anyway. And just this past week, we dove into the father wound. And normally our sessions are 2 hours. Zoom, we've got, whatever, we're 10-ish guys on Zoom, and we have a bunch of really powerful and revealing reflection questions. Really, as we're exploring the father wound, we're doing a lot of inquiry, self-inquiry, reflection, and revealing in the presence of other men. And, 2 hours. Well, 2 hours, we were just barely getting started. 2 hours. I said to my co-facilitators, like, okay, dude, next year we need to do at least 3 hours. And even then we'll still just be getting started. Once men start talking about the woundings of our fathers, we could say, oh, grief was coming through. Tears were being revealed, anger, but John, even men that were beaten, like, you were beaten. I was more neglected. My dad took off at 4. And we had a great relationship because he was never around. He was a superhero in my brain. Yeah. It was a fantasy.
Holiday dad.
There you go. Those are pretty great. Holiday dads are pretty great. There's very little disciplining going on. It's just money and candy and hugs. And but when I got to know him as an adult, holy shit, I don't like this asshole. Who is this fucker? Right. But I think I'm 48. I think I was 39. When I first stood in a group of men, and what came screaming out of my mouth was, "How could you leave me alone? You asshole! You asshole! You left me alone!" Like, whoa, where'd that come from? Where did that come from?
That right there is the key. The absent father.
Yeah.
Whether he's emotionally absent, physically absent, spiritually absent. That's the father that most men had, and a lot of men still have, is an absent father.
Yeah.
In this country now, 50% of the households is a single parent household, and that's usually the mother and the son. Very seldom is it the father takes over the total child. So in my generation, and some to follow, but not so much before me. See, my dad and his dad worked side by side in the field. Then, as Robert articulated so well, the Industrial Revolution came out of the house. Father comes back in after work, exhausted, tired, doing a job he hates. He gets a beer, a newspaper, turns on the news, goes to bed, and repeat, repeat, repeat. And so the only person that's raising me is my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so I take on this, what I wrote about many years ago. I take on this false feminine that
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to be gentle and spiritual and stuff, uh, almost more like my mother was. And so one of the things that Robert and others and I talked about at these men's conferences back in the 80s and 90s was a lot of men had, like me, had convinced themselves that they were deeply in touch with their feminine side.
Yeah.
And what I realized and later wrote about was no, I was demonstrating what I call a false feminine
Mm-hmm.
because I had not really embraced masculinity. I had exiled it.
Yeah.
And the women, girls and women loved me because I acted, pretended like I had this feminine component that,
Mm-hmm.
because I got trained to listen to my mother at 4 5. At 18, when a woman would talk, I would just say,
You could be really present and
"You're
really,
so listening to me."
yeah.
I never had that before.
Yeah.
And I look back and go, shit, I just wanted to get in the bed.
Yeah.
But this is how I would pretend.
One of the really significant distinctions, I suppose, that you really helped open up for me, that I've been working with these past few months, and even it revealed itself in this visit where I went to my father. I've been working on for many years now, speaking to him the truths that I had been withholding for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Being my own man in my relationship with him. And it's been a work in progress for many years because I don't see him but more than a few hours every few years for the most part. I mean, literally, I'll see him for 2 hours in a hotel room when he happens to be in town every 3 years or so, And in the last, I don't know, 15 years, I've had, long weekend visits with him twice. So it's hard to do a lot of work when we're not in contact very much. And our phone calls, tend to not be that I don't know, enjoyable, let's just say for me. So anyway, this is, this is the distinction that came up in one of our sessions. I don't know, the practice, I suppose, of to stop sunning your father.
Mm-hmm.
That was a revelation for me. I'd never really heard it put like that. Say more about that.
I was on tour. I was like 36 years old. Flying Boy was doing really well. And I was on a recovery tour with these incredible authors that you have read about, know about. But we went to Australia on tour. We went to a bunch of cities. But there was this one man, his name was Dr. Cruz. And he was really big in the recovery circles. And his wife was Sharon Wickscheider Cruz, and she was on tour with us. And she was really a big mama and big queen in recovery. But I was telling Dr. Cruz about me and my dad and how we don't get along, how we have this clash every time we would see each other, and I was just going on about that. And I said to him, what's that about? I'm 36. I've been teaching college since I was 25, written a couple of books. And he just looked at me and he said, well, you're still sunning your father. And I said, what?
Yeah.
He said, yeah, you're still sunning. I said, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And he said, when you get with your father, no matter what age you are or what you've accomplished, you act like a son. He talks to you like a son. He stays the father to a 36-year-old man. And that's the dynamic. And that's the dynamic that you need. Well, that coincided deeply with my Flying Boy book and the work with men and the Austin Men Set, but I never heard anything like that. So profound.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, I still talk to men and I hear it that they're still at
Yeah.
the son, and they're 55 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And when they go home to visit their elderly father, he becomes a father and they become a son.
I,
I had a funny incident about this about 2 years ago. It's very funny. Me and my dad repaired to a large degree. We got back together.
mm-hmm.
He put me back in the will. It was good. But about a couple of years ago, I went home. So I would have been like 69. And so I come home and my dad kind of jokingly says, "Boy, when you going to get rid of that beard and cut your hair?"
Mm.
I said, "Listen, Dad, you got to understand that you can't say shit like that to somebody that's eligible to be in an old folks home." You know?
Mm-hmm.
But by then I'm turning that
Yeah.
or so to speak, because I had dealt with it at such. I'm going to stop being this man's son.
Yeah.
Either talk man to man, or we don't talk.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, this weekend with my dad, there was, my dad for so much when I was a teenager, he would harbor this thing over me, which makes sense when I'm a teenager, I suppose, or when I'm a kid, is like, when you're ready, son, X will be revealed, whatever. Life will reveal some big secret. The secrets will be revealed. He didn't use those exact words, but he would use the words when you're ready a lot. And which implies that I'm not ready. Fine. I'm 10, I'm 12, I'm 15. Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not ready. I know I'm not ready. It's in my bones. I know I'm not ready because I haven't been initiated. I don't know, because there's something to come. I get it. Well, that day never came. There was never a day where I crossed any threshold, certainly not in his eyes. And even this past weekend, there was a moment where he said again, "You're not ready." And I said to him, "Dad, I'm fucking 48 years old. When am I going to be ready for whatever this thing is that you think will be revealed to me?" I was like, "This is just, can we give this up now? Can you just we just drop this?" And I mean, there's a lot I'm not sharing here just because this is also a public forum. And, I want to protect my father's very unique brand of insanity from public ears at this time. But that same, it was very helpful to go back into this relationship with him. And it was very difficult. It was very, very painful for me at the same time because of the heaviness that he's living inside of. The burdens that he is uniquely carrying, he is solely carrying. He's carrying massive amounts of burden. And it's almost like, in a way, in his mind, I'll be ready. I don't know. I don't know what criteria I have to meet.
To assume the same burden.
Yes.
That he failed to shed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When you know a burden like I know and have lived all these years, then you will be ready. Then you'll know what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
And one of the things that you decided, is I will carry some burdens, but they won't be the same kind you carry.
Yeah.
Therefore, you won't understand my burdens. But luckily, as I get older and older, I will begin to understand your burdens, Dad.
Yeah.
But you'll never understand my burdens because they're apples and oranges. But some of your burden, I understand now at 60 that I didn't understand. 35 or 40. And so that may be part of what he's saying is, when you walk in my shoes, then you'll know.
It's certainly part of it. And again, I'll share more with you, offset as it were, because it's a unique brand of delusionality, I think, but all the same, the sunning my father, had I gone there, and look, I'm sure a part of me will always sun my father, but knowing that the bigger part of me went there as my own man. Your choices are not my choices. Your reality is not my reality. I'm bringing my eyes, my ears, my voice, my being. You've invited me into your home. Here I come. Hear me roar.
Like it or not.
And I said that, like
here
it or not.
Come.
Hurricane Bryan, here we go. This is what you get. But I'm only here for 3 days, so don't worry. It's not, I'll breeze in and blow out just like a real hurricane. Anyway, I'm curious. John, as you're in your 70s now, and you've been doing this work a long time. I know it's taken various formats over the years. How has your relationship to this work, working with men, to your own relationship to your work? I mean, how has this all evolved for you over the years? Does that question make sense?
Well, it's evolved with experience and age.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, I was sort of being treated like an elder prematurely.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
So I would be at a men's gathering, either mine and Robert's or something.
Yeah.
And a 70 or 80-year-old man would be sitting in the audience listening to me
Yeah.
sing, which was
Yeah.
now looking back.
Yeah.
But so over the decade, I, to a large degree, thanks to Robert Bly and my relationship, over the decades, I watched him elder, and then I, in my 40s and my 50s, he and I started teaching together, I think, when I was 44, 45. So I was with him a lot, and I would see how being an elder looked, sounded, and so that was a big part of how, as my decades passed, now at almost 72, I live into that elder place, not so much with confidence, but with a lot of gratitude for having worked with men, thousands of men now. And to be seen as an elder at this stage of my career is one of the great joys of my life.
Mm.
I have about a half a dozen young men, anywhere from 35 to 50, who interact with me, not so much as a men's movement guy, but an elder who has been involved with the men for 38 years. And that's a great blessing to me to be seen that way.
Yeah.
Now, sadly, because of the virus, the whole men's gatherings in person and stuff that I did for so long has totally gone away, for me. There's people like you doing these work, there's people in San Francisco but in terms of getting on a plane, flying to Utah and speaking to 150 men, that's over for me and will probably never come back. I get to do Zoom and podcasts, those kind of things with somebody like you who is on the same page, basically. And watching you, hopefully watching me by the time you're in your 60s and 70s. I mean, probably one of the greatest things of my men's work was getting to sit beside the master of men's work, the king of men's work. And also the fact that the king never lorded that over me at any time was very healing on levels that I won't be able to explain if I'm 90 years old.
Well, I can intuitively just feel it.
This is how first time Robert and I got together, we were at a men's conference in California, and they put me and him in the same cabin for the weekend. And up till that time, we talked on the phone or whatever, but we hadn't. So long story short, I know we're running out of time. We were walking. Now, he'd read The Flying Boy, and he'd been supportive of it and supportive of my career. So two things happened that weekend. He said, now, you're that guy who's written The Flying Boy, right? And I said, yeah, that's right. And I thank you for mentioning it on your tapes. And he said, and you've written some other books, right? And he said, and you sent them to me for an endorsement, right? And I said, absolutely. He said, did I ever endorse any? I said, absolutely not. And he said, so you're mad at me, right? And I said, absolutely not. He said, why? Everybody I don't respond to is mad at me. Because you're not my father. That before I met you, I've been doing the father-son wound,
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 years. And so, no, I'm not mad at you. You're not my damn daddy. You've already given me more than my dad did,
Yeah.
from afar.
Yeah.
And then a couple of days later, we were taking a walk together, and he said, I'm going to ask you something. I said, okay. He said, what am I doing wrong with men? Now, this is 1988 or 89, somewhere in there, 90, somewhere in there. And I said, you really want my opinion? And he said, yeah. I said, you and James and Michael tend to shame men at these conferences that y'all do, that I listen to. And some of my men's guys have told me about being shamed. And I said, these men have been shamed enough in their life, and I would encourage you to get rid of that shit. He said, we really do that? I said, yeah. Somebody says, Robert, I wish you were my dad. And you say, throw that man out of the window and ban him from all future conferences. Like, you don't need to hear that shit. You don't want to hear him say, sit down. But, And so as we were walking, he said, okay, all right. And I thought, now I need to ask him the same thing. What am I doing wrong? And I said, so what am I doing wrong? And he told me what I was doing. And he was right,
What were you doing wrong?
That my first 3 books was personal narrative. And when I'd give talks at men's things, I would go more into the personal. John, you're an educated, intellectual, and you didn't finish your doctorate, but you're an academic.
Yeah.
You hide that. You push it aside because you're afraid that you can't hold your own. And he said, and you can. And now I want you to bring some of that back.
Interesting.
And he was right.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know how right he was about my intelligence, but he was right that I was trying to be the blue collar to his intellectual persona.
Wow. I know there's so many more stories and teaching stories and insights. I mean, I want to just mine that for more, but I have just a few more questions before we wrap up. Okay. One of the things I'm really curious about is if you think men are struggling with different issues today, or if they're still kind of the same over these, last 40, 50 years. Has much changed, or are we?
Yes and no.
Yeah, that's immediately came to my mind as answer is probably going to be yes and no.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I had a 19-year-old guy call me not long ago. He'd just gotten back from a tour of duty, wherever it was, Afghanistan or wherever. And he'd read The Flying Boy. Flying Boy's 38 years old, still in print, but 38 years old. And he said, I wondered if I liked the book and I enjoyed the book, but I was wondering if you would work with me. And I said, well, Bud, I'm so out of touch with your generation. I said, I can't imagine I'd be of any use to me. And he said, listen, my father was absent. He was physically abusive. He was alcoholic. And to top it all, he was raised in the South like you were. So I think we'll be fine. And I thought, okay, damn it. I was hoping you'd say, you're right, John, we have nothing in common.
Right.
Now, the two things that are still there, but most men don't work on it anymore much or think about it. It's not written about. Robert coined the term soft male, which I was one and he was one. Soft male. And I see that softness, especially in 30 and under, right and left, soft male, who has not entered into men's work thinking they don't need it, thinking their fathers were great fathers and mothers great mothers. So that's the same. The entitled 30-year-old guy, very different in my generation, even though I too became a soft male because of the feminization that I got.
It makes tragic sense that I don't know if you've heard the name Andrew Tate.
Yeah, I think I have somebody.
I've mentioned him a few times on this podcast only because he's probably the most well-known name in, I don't even know what
men's circles or men's.
Well, the world of masculinity, let's say. But and this is my personal opinion, he's a horrible human being. He is teaching he's teaching some of the right things in really fucking horrible ways. And he's teaching men how to be hard. Let's say that. I guess that's why this comes up for me. The soft male makes sense. We got so many of that, so much soft maleness going on that a corrosive, awful, misogynistic brute of a man comes along and has a direction to offer that a lot of men would flock to that because he has a power that is lacking.
I've heard a few other men say the same thing. And because of that, I've never really looked him up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't like to keep talking about him on my podcast. It's just that, for the sake of contrast, he's a good contrast.
I have a 50-year-old client, psychologist, and he followed another prominent masculine guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the guy's main teachings was how men could get laid and should get laid as often as possible. And I just told my client, please listen to that shit.
Yeah.
50 years old. And this guy is just saying whatever guy who's still traumatized to hear, how can I get laid more?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the other thing I'm going to respond to about this for the benefit of my dear friend Robert Bly, I don't care. I'm at a place where I don't care too much. Completely not care, but too much, whether men cite my work or not, that are out there doing so-called men stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I get very upset when I'll hear one of these guys present something that Robert presented in 1986 and won't attribute to him. So one of the things that I made myself a commitment to is that I would always, no matter how old I got, I was always going to attribute to Robert because it makes me mad.
Yeah.
These guys say something and you go, that's right out of Robert Bly's play. He's not, he doesn't even know who Robert Bly is.
Yeah.
You
know, what I attribute this to, having been in this profession or this world, this domain for probably the last 15 years, and I see this a lot, same in teachers, and I went through my own phase of wanting to be the one responsible for the good insight. I think in a world where everybody wants to be special, and so many of us men particularly, we not only do we not feel special, we feel left alone. I got to be the hero. I have to be the hero. And the only way I can be the hero is if I'm the one that came up with the good insight. I see this I think it's rampant in the world right now. The hero complex, the hero archetype playing out through these, 27, 30-year-old wisdom teachers, influencers, we call them. Yeah. So I understand you, man. And I really get that. And
there's this young man I've been working with. He's a psychologist, psychotherapist named Mikey Brackett. And we're going to do a thing later in the fall called From Hero to Artist. And part of that is to get rid of this hunger to be the hero. And let the person be more artistic in their life than be heroic in their life.
Interesting.
And I'll let you know about that one.
Please, is that going to be publicly available?
Yeah, it's going to be a webinar or
cast
or whatever you call it.
Well, I'll definitely help.
September or October.
I'll be
been thinking about it a lot. I was brought up to be the hero.
Yeah.
I played out the hero
in
my 30s and then less in my 40s, less in my 50s. And then have a heart attack at 59 you have to really start that whole hero shit, and so that's part of it. Well, this is I've enjoyed this more than I can tell you. I
Thank you.
do this, much. I mean, as I told you when we planned it, I'll get a podcast interviewer who'll say, "Tell me about your anger work."
Yeah.
Focus on anger, and I enjoy it. But this is so conversational, and it's not really affixed to one particular theme. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. Good
Yeah.
job on you. Thank you. You did great. I appreciate you for having me on. And
Well, thank you, John. You've been a blessing in my life. You were a gift. The connection with you was gifted to me by one of the men who was my coaching client, who heard my need for wanting to work with an older man in a therapeutic context, and he had worked with you before. His name is Sean, and so I'm so grateful to him. So grateful to him for making that connection, and just really enjoying getting to know you, getting to work with you, and to be able to have this kind of conversation with you,
let's do it again sometime in the future.
I will definitely love to do it again because there's so many more questions I want to ask. But we'll hold it there. I'll direct people to your books, and of course, when you're ready with that hero to artist experience, I'm all about helping bring people to that. John, I think we could end it there. I'm really grateful.
Feels right to me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. You did a great job, and I sure enjoy telling these. It's my Robert Bly stories.